Every year, millions of people walk into America's national parks. They take photos, they hike trails, they breathe in that pine air and feel more alive than they have in months. Most of them walk back out, but some don't. There's something deeply unsettling about a national park disappearance. It's not like vanishing from a city street, where there are cameras, witnesses, a logical chain of events you can reconstruct. In the wilderness, the trees don't talk, the trails don't keep records, and the search area is impossibly, terrifyingly vast. What I want to tell you about today are 3 disappearances. 3 people who walked into America's most beautiful places and simply never came out. A 6-year-old boy playing hide and seek with his family. A 14-year-old girl who walked 50 yards to take a photograph. A 16-year-old on a school field trip, walking ahead of her classmates on the trail back to the bus. 3 cases, 3 national parks, and not a single answer. These cases span more than a decade, 1969 to 1981, and 2 of them happened in the exact same national park, the Great Smoky Mountains, which has more unexplained disappearances than almost anywhere else in the country. Each of these stories has a detail that doesn't sit right, something that pulls your brain in a direction it doesn't want to go. I want you to pay attention to those details, because they're the reason these cases are still open, still unsolved, still haunting the families who have been waiting, in one case, for more than 50 years, for someone to tell them what happened. Let's start with the youngest. Dennis Lloyd Martin was 6 years old. He was 6 days away from his 7th birthday. He lived in Knoxville, Tennessee, about an hour's drive from the Great Smoky Mountains National Park. His family knew the area well. This wasn't their first camping trip. It was a tradition. On the morning of Saturday, June 14th, 1969, Dennis woke up at Russell Field, where his family had camped overnight. Him, his father, his grandfather, his older brother. A multi-generational Father's Day weekend trip. The plan was simple. Hike a few miles, set up a new camp at Spence Field, enjoy the day. Dennis was what you'd expect from a 6-year-old boy. Curious, energetic, maybe a little too brave for his own good. He was wearing a red t-shirt, blue shorts, and sneakers. Nothing that would make him blend into the forest. You'd think that would matter. By late afternoon, the group had reached Spence Field, a beautiful open meadow surrounded by dense forest, about 5,000 feet up in the mountains. Other families were scattered across the field, camping, enjoying the view. And sometime around 4:30 p.m., Dennis and some other children started a game of hide and seek. That game never ended. Here's what we know. Dennis and 2 other boys were playing together. They would run into the edge of the woods, hide behind trees or bushes, and then come sprinting back into the open field, laughing. At one point, the other boys ran back. Dennis didn't. His father called his name. Nothing. He walked to the tree line. Nothing. He shouted louder. Still nothing. The time between when Dennis was last seen and when the alarm was raised was by most accounts about 3 to 5 minutes. 3 to 5 minutes. In a dense forest, a 6-year-old boy can't get far in 3 to 5 minutes. He should have been within shouting distance. He should have been just behind the nearest cluster of trees. But he wasn't. What happened next is one of the largest search operations in the history of the National Park Service. Within hours, park rangers were combing the area. But the next morning, the operation had exploded. More than 1,400 searchers, helicopters, tracking dogs, the FBI, and this is what makes the Dennis Martin case genuinely unusual. A special forces unit that had been training nearby in North Carolina was pulled off maneuvers and sent in to help. This was 1969. The Vietnam War was raging, and somehow, in the middle of all that, Green Berets from Fort Bragg ended up combing the Great Smoky Mountains for a 6-year-old boy. They searched for weeks, grid by grid, every cave, every creek bed, every hollow tree. There's a creek that runs through Spence Field. They searched that mile by mile, inch by inch, thinking maybe he'd fallen in. Nothing. Not a single trace of Dennis Martin has ever been found. In 57 years, not a shoe, not a piece of clothing, not a bone. But there's a detail in this case that sits at the edge of every report, every investigation, every late-night forum discussion about what happened to Dennis Martin. And it's this. Later that same afternoon, around the time Dennis vanished, a family hiking about 7 miles from Spence Field heard something. They described a terrible, sickening scream coming from the woods. And then, they said, they saw a man emerge from the tree line. The man was described as roughly dressed, unshaven, carrying something over his shoulder. Now, you have to be careful with eyewitness accounts from 1969. Memories blur. Trauma distorts. And here's the detail that actually makes this account harder to dismiss, not easier. This family didn't report it right away. They had no idea a boy was even missing. It wasn't until about a week later, once word of the search finally reached them, that they came forward and told rangers what they'd seen and heard that afternoon. The man was never identified. No one matching that description was ever questioned. The lead simply dissolved. Dennis would be 64 years old today. His parents are gone now. His father passed away without ever knowing what happened to his son. The case file is still open, but nobody is actively searching anymore. The National Park Service officially closed the investigation decades ago, though they maintain the missing persons file. There's a question in this case that has never been answered. If Dennis simply wandered off and got lost, a 6-year-old in sneakers in dense forest, the search dogs should have found him. The 1,400 searchers, the Green Berets, the helicopters, someone should have found something. Unless he was never lost, unless someone took him. A child vanishing from a family campsite is every parent's worst nightmare. But the next case is a different kind of horror, because this time, the person who vanished was surrounded by people who could see her, people who were watching her, people who, in theory, should have been able to stop it. And still, she was gone. Stacy Arras was 14 years old. She lived in Saratoga, California. She was bright, athletic, a good student. She'd been looking forward to this trip for weeks, a horseback camping expedition through Yosemite National Park with her father and a small group of others. This was July 17th, 1981. Summer in Yosemite. The park was crowded. The weather was perfect. The group had been riding for days, staying at designated campsites, taking in some of the most beautiful scenery on Earth. Stacy had brought her camera, a simple 35mm. She'd been photographing the trip, the horses, the mountains, the alpine lakes. This was the kind of trip you remember for the rest of your life. By late afternoon, the group had reached a place called Sunrise High Sierra Camp. It sits at about 9,400 feet. The air is thin up there. The granite domes of Yosemite stretch out in every direction. It is genuinely one of the most beautiful places in the world. Stacy's father was in the cabin. Other members of the group were scattered around the camp, relaxing after a long day of riding. Stacy wanted to take one more photograph. There was a small lake near the camp. A glacial tarn, really. Cold, clear, reflecting the mountains. Stacy told the group she was going to walk down to the lake to take some pictures. She was accompanied by a 77-year-old man from the riding group. He stayed behind to rest while she continued down the trail. The distance between the camp and the lake was about 50 yards. 50 yards? That's half a football field. You can shout across 50 yards. You can see someone across 50 yards. You can run it in about 8 seconds. Stacy walked those 50 yards. She reached the lake, she took her photographs, and then she turned around and started walking back. Here's where the timeline gets precise in a way that makes it more disturbing, not less. The 77-year-old man saw Stacy heading back toward the camp. Others in the group could see her too, or at least they could see the trail she was on. And then she was gone. Not gone, as in, she walked behind a tree and they lost sight of her. Gone as in, 1 second she was there, the next she simply wasn't. Her father realized she hadn't returned. He walked down to the lake, nothing. He called her name. The mountains echoed it back, but Stacy didn't answer. The group searched the immediate area. They checked the cabins. They checked the lake, God forbid, the lake. Nothing. By nightfall, the National Park Service had been alerted. By the next morning, a full search was underway. The Yosemite search for Stacy Arras was massive. Helicopters, search dogs, ground teams working in grid patterns. They scoured every inch of that alpine basin. They searched the lake, fully expecting, frankly, to find her there. They didn't. They expanded the radius. 1 mile, 2 miles, 5 miles, nothing. And then, on day 3 of the search, they found one thing. Her camera lens cap, a lens cap, on the ground, near the lake. Not her camera, not her clothes, not her backpack, not her body. A lens cap. It was the only trace of Stacy Arras that has ever been found. Now, here's the part of this case that gets stranger the more you look at it. In a heavily publicized disappearance like this, you expect answers. You expect, at minimum, a theory. Did she fall? Did she get disoriented? Did someone take her? But Yosemite National Park has never released Stacy Arras' full case file. It's been more than 40 years, and the complete file, including the search logs, the witness statements, the internal investigation notes, remains sealed. The Park Service has cited an ongoing investigation exemption to keep it that way. But 40 years for a missing 14-year-old girl. There are people who believe the Park Service knows more than it's saying, that there's something in those records, some detail, some inconsistency, some uncomfortable fact that they don't want the public to see. 2 disappearances, 2 national parks, 0 answers. But the last case is different. Because this time, the person who vanished was surrounded by nearly 40 classmates on a school field trip, walking the last stretch of trail back to the bus. And when the group looked up, Teresa Lynn Gibson went by Trenny. She was 16 years old, a student at Bearden High School in Knoxville, Tennessee. She was smart, independent. She had a reputation for being reliable, the kind of student teachers trusted. On October 8th, 1976, Trenny boarded a school bus with about 40 other students for a field trip to the Great Smoky Mountains. Yes, the same national park where Dennis Martin vanished 7 years earlier. The destination was Clingman's Dome, known today as Kuohe, the highest point in the Great Smoky Mountains, at 6,643 feet. From the observation tower at the top, you can see for 100 miles on a clear day. And October 8th, 1976, was a beautiful, clear day. After visiting the tower, the group hiked down to a place called Andrews Bald, a grassy meadow surrounded by dense spruce fir forest. The plan was to eat lunch, enjoy the view, and then head back to the bus. The trail from Andrews Bald back toward the parking area is narrow, dense forest on both sides. In October, the undergrowth is thick, dead leaves, fallen branches, rhododendron tunnels so dark you can't see 10 feet in. Close to the end of the hike, with the parking lot less than half a mile away, the group stopped to rest. Trenny didn't. She seemed eager to get back to the bus, and she kept walking out ahead of the rest of the class. This is not disputed. The problem is what happened next. She never made it to the bus. Nobody saw her stumble. Nobody heard her call out. She was simply walking the trail alone in a national park in broad daylight, surrounded, just minutes earlier, by dozens of her own classmates. And then she wasn't. The teachers did a head count. They called her name. They sent students back along the trail. Nothing. Within hours, park rangers were on scene. Within days, the search operation was enormous. Search dogs, helicopters, hundreds of volunteers. They focused on a particular area, the steep, rugged terrain below the trail, where someone might fall if they lost their footing. The weather turned. October in the Smokies is unpredictable. Cold rain, dense fog, temperatures that drop fast once the sun is gone. The search became more difficult, then more desperate. They found nothing. Not her jacket, not her shoes, not her backpack. Nearly 50 years later, Trenny Gibson has never been found. And now we arrive at the detail that makes this case genuinely different from the other 2. The detail that has kept the Trenny Gibson disappearance alive in forums, in podcasts, in late-night conversations between people who can't let this go. In the days and weeks after she disappeared, there were reported sightings. A hospital in North Carolina initially thought they might have treated a girl matching her description the same day she vanished. That turned out to be a local girl. Police also got a report about an underage girl trying to get married in Bryson City, North Carolina. Investigators checked, and it wasn't her either. And then there was the strangest report of all. Someone told Knoxville police that a girl who looked like Trenny had boarded a plane in Newark, New Jersey with a much older man, and the two had gotten off together in Nassau, in the Bahamas. Every single one of those leads was investigated. None of them were ever confirmed, but together they fed a strange, persistent theory that Trenny Gibson didn't die in those mountains, that she walked away deliberately or was taken somewhere far from the search area entirely. Her family has always rejected this theory, vehemently. They described Trenny as a happy teenager with no reason to run. She had friends, she had plans, she had a life she was excited about. But those leads keep this thread alive. If she didn't die in the mountains, if she left one way or another, where did she go? And why? And who, if anyone, was helping her? Of course, there's another possibility, a darker one. The person seen in those other reports wasn't Trenny Gibson at all. It was someone who looked enough like her to generate a report. And the real Trenny was already gone, somewhere in those mountains, hidden in a place the searchers never thought to look. If that's true, then someone out there knows what happened. Someone was on that trail. Someone saw something. And they've kept that secret for nearly 50 years. 3 people, 3 national parks, 1 question. Dennis Martin, 6 years old, vanished while playing hide and seek. Stacy Arras, 14 years old, vanished walking 50 yards. Trenny Gibson, 16 years old, vanished on the last stretch of a trail, minutes from her own classmates. What connects these cases isn't just that they happened in national parks. It's the impossible nature of each disappearance.